Chief Alfred sat alone in his study, the evening sun casting long shadows on the cream-coloured walls. The silence in the room was heavy, broken only by the slow ticking of the old wall clock above his head. A glass of untouched water sat on the table beside him, the condensation trailing down to the wood like tears. His eyes lingered on the shelves across the room, books lined neatly, memories tucked between worn pages. His fingers drummed lightly on the armrest of the chair as he leaned back, deep in thought. So much had changed in just a year. So many masks had fallen off, and yet the truth still lived in silence. He picked up his phone and dialed a familiar number. "Hello, Dad." Christian's voice came through. "Christian, come and see me after work today alone," Alfred said, his voice calm but firm. "Is everything all right? Just come. I need to talk to you." When Christian arrived later that evening, Alfred was still in the same seat, eyes thoughtful, body calm. "Sit down, my son," Alfred said, gesturing to the chair across from him. Christian sat, trying to read the expression on his father's face. "You sounded serious on the phone. Is anything wrong?" Alfred smiled faintly. "Do you remember the book I used to read to you when you were small? The one with the green cover, about the boy who loved birds?" Christian's brows pinched together, then softened with a smile. "Yes, I remember. You used to say I reminded you of him." Alfred nodded slowly. "I kept that book. It's still on one of these shelves. One day, when the time is right, I want you to look for it. Inside it, you'll find something you'll need." Christian looked confused. "What do you mean? What's inside the book?" Alfred's voice dropped to a gentle murmur. "It's not just a story anymore. When the time comes, you'll understand." There was a beat of silence between them before Alfred leaned forward, his tone suddenly more serious. "Listen to me very carefully, Christian. Right now, I want you to be patient. Don't make any sudden moves. Don't speak to anyone about the investigation or the documents." "But, no," Alfred raised a hand gently to cut him off. "I know you're angry. I know you feel betrayed. But you must trust me. Everything I'm doing for you. And I need you to stay alert." Christian looked at him, heart thudding. "Do you know something I don't?" Alfred hesitated for a second, then gave a short nod. "More than I'm ready to say. Just remember what I've told you. Don't trust anyone, and don't act in a hurry." Christian leaned back in the chair, his mind already running with questions, but he knew Alfred too well. If his father said now wasn't the time, then it wasn't. Still, the way he spoke, the weight in his voice, it left Christian both curious and unsettled. He stood up slowly. "All right, Dad. I'll wait." Alfred gave him a small smile, one that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Good boy." As Christian walked out of the study that night, he couldn't help but glance once more at the bookshelf. He would find the book. And when he did, maybe, just maybe, the truth would finally speak. The dining table gleamed under the chandelier's soft light. The long mahogany table was set for 5, Chief Alfred, Margaret, Christian, Pascal, and the ever-silent weight of the past year. It had been Alfred's idea. "We're having dinner at home this Friday," he had said earlier in the week, his voice firm. "Just us. I want to look into the eyes of my family again." Pascal had smiled, masking his surprise. "That sounds good, Dad. It's been a while." But behind his smile, plans were already taking shape. That afternoon, he cornered one of the new maids near the back kitchen. She was young, nervous, and too eager to please. "You want to earn more than your salary?" Pascal asked, slipping a brown envelope into her trembling hands. The maid stared down at the envelope, then up at him. "Yes, sir." He handed her a tiny bottle containing a clear, odourless liquid. "Put this in Christian's wine glass. Only his. No one else's. Do it right, and you'll be taken care of." The girl hesitated, then nodded. When evening came, The dining room buzzed with the aroma of grilled chicken, jollof rice, peppered fish, and the rich scent of expensive wine. The family gathered, Pascal arriving first, suave in a navy blue shirt, Christian not long after, wearing a simple white shirt, his expression thoughtful. Margaret sat quietly, picking at her food, barely raising her eyes. Alfred, on the other hand, looked more alive than he had in months. "I called this dinner," Alfred said, raising a glass of wine, "because I believe it's time to end this cold war between us. We're a family. Flawed, yes, but still bound together. I want us to start again." Christian offered a small nod, lifting his glass without a word. Pascal smiled as he watched the maid subtly place the filled glass before Christian. His fingers tightened around his own glass, eyes gleaming. "I agree, Dad," Pascal said smoothly. "I've made my mistakes, we all have, but I'm ready to make peace." Dinner continued with polite chatter. Christian barely spoke, but he ate, drank, and listened. Alfred's voice carried the evening, talking about the early days of the company, about unity, about legacy. When the plates were cleared and the mood relaxed, Alfred turned to Christian. "Come to my study when you're done, son. Just for a minute," he said with a smile. Christian nodded, rising quietly a few minutes later and following Alfred into the study. The moment they were alone, Pascal stepped out into the hallway, pulled out his phone and called Anita. "It's done," he whispered. "Whatever happens next, make sure your end is ready." On the other end, Anita's voice was sharp. "Understood, don't mess this up." Back in the study, Alfred was seated behind his desk, a thick file open before him. He didn't say much. He gave Christian the number of his auditor. "When you call him, tell him it's Christian," he said. "He will know what to do. You can trust him." Christian quickly memorized the number. "Is this about the company?" Alfred looked at him. "It's about everything, but not tonight. Go get some rest." Christian's head was spinning as he stepped out of the study. The room swayed slightly, the light too bright, the hallway too narrow. He pressed a palm to his forehead and climbed the stairs slowly, each step feeling heavier than the last. By the time he reached his room, he didn't even bother to undress. He dropped onto the bed fully clothed, breath shallow, mind foggy. Pascal stood in the dim hallway, the shadows dancing on the walls as the light from Alfred's study spilled beneath the door. He waited, and when he heard the soft click of Christian's bedroom door closing upstairs, he slid on a pair of leather gloves from his pocket and turned the study's doorknob. Alfred was seated at his desk, his back straight, eyes heavy with disappointment. He didn't look up as Pascal walked in. "So," Pascal began, his tone edged with ice, "you found out, didn't you?" Alfred's gaze slowly lifted to meet his son's. "Yes, I know everything." Pascal took a step closer, the knife hidden beneath his blazer pressing against his ribs. "And now, I suppose you finally found the perfect excuse to give everything to him," he sneered. "The golden boy." "You brought this on yourself," Alfred said calmly, folding his hands. "I gave you a chance, Pascal. I opened the company to you. I trusted you to walk in integrity. But you chose greed. You chose deception." Pascal's eyes darkened. "So you were just waiting for a reason to toss me aside? Just like that?" "No." Alfred's voice was calm, measured. "I was waiting for you to be the man I believed you could be. But you failed me." Pascal's lips trembled, not with sadness, but rage. "I won't let you hand my legacy to someone else." His hand darted inside his jacket, and before Alfred could rise from his seat, Pascal lunged. The blade sliced clean through fabric, skin, and bone. Alfred gasped, a choking sound escaping his throat as his eyes widened in shock and pain. Pascal drove the knife deeper, his hand steady, expression cold. "I'm sorry, Father," Pascal whispered mockingly, "but this is the only way." Alfred slumped forward onto the desk, his breath escaping in a final broken exhale. His body went still. Pascal stood over him, chest heaving as he pulled the blade free. He stared at the lifeless form for a moment, then turned and left the room, closing the door silently behind him. Upstairs, the house was quiet. He moved quickly to Christian's room, his gloves now smeared with blood. Christian lay on the bed, completely still, breathing slow and shallow from the drugged wine. Pascal approached the bedside, wrapping Christian's unconscious fingers carefully around the handle of the bloody knife, then placing it under the bed where it would be discovered. He worked swiftly, ensuring no smudges, no mistakes. Once satisfied, he stepped back, peeling off the gloves and slipping them into a disposable pouch in his jacket. He descended the stairs and found the maid waiting in the corridor, trembling. "Now," Pascal said, his voice low and firm. "Go to the study. Open the door and scream. Do it now." The girl blinked, terrified. "But, sir!" "Now!" he snapped. She flinched and rushed away. Pascal stood back, calmly adjusting his shirt cuffs as he listened. Then came the blood-curdling scream, and just like that, the trap was set. The sound of sirens sliced through the silence of the night, red and blue lights flashing against the grand walls of Chief Alfred's mansion. The gates were wide open, security guards overwhelmed, housemaids sobbing in corners as uniformed officers poured into the compound. Christian was still drowsy, the lingering effect of the drug in his system slowing his movements. He had managed to sit on the edge of his bed, rubbing his eyes, confused and disoriented. Then the door burst open. "Hands where we can see them!" a police officer barked, aiming a flashlight directly into Christian's face. What's going on?" Christian mumbled, shielding his eyes. "Why are you in my room?" Two officers stepped forward and grabbed him by the arms, dragging him to his feet. He staggered, barely able to keep up. "You're under arrest for the murder of Chief Alfred," the officer announced. Christian froze. "What?" His voice was hoarse. "My father, what are you saying? What happened?" A third officer stepped in and began searching the room. He bent down near the bed and gasped. "Sir, we found the weapon." From under the bed, he carefully pulled out a blood-stained kitchen knife. Christian's eyes widened in horror. No, I don't know how that got there. I swear I don't know anything about this." The officer shoved the knife into an evidence bag, sealing it with a zip. "It was under your bed," he said coldly. "That's enough for now." Christian tried to resist as the handcuffs snapped around his wrists. "Please, let me speak to someone. There's a mistake. There has to be a mistake." But they weren't listening. They pulled him out into the hallway, past the frightened maids who stood in corners weeping silently. The chief's body had already been removed from the study, covered in a white sheet, but the smell of death still lingered in the air. Pascal stood near the front door, arms folded, face blank. He watched as Christian was dragged past him, their eyes locking for a split second. "Pascal," Christian's voice cracked. "Please, tell them I didn't do this. You know me." Pascal didn't blink. "They have the evidence, Christian. Let the law take its course." Christian's breath hitched. "I would never hurt him. He was my father." Pascal turned away. Christian was pushed into the back of a police van. His head was bowed, tears running down his face, his heart pounding with fear and confusion. The gates of the mansion slowly closed behind them, shutting off the world that had suddenly turned dark for Christian. Inside, Pascal held his trembling mother close on the couch. Margaret's body shook as silent tears streamed down her face, her mind refusing to accept what had just happened. The living room felt cold despite the warm lights, and the echo of the police siren still rang faintly in her ears. Her husband was gone, murdered. Her breath caught in her throat as her thoughts circled one horrifying truth: Chief Alfred was dead. Margaret slowly pulled back from Pascal's embrace, her eyes wide with disbelief as she looked up at her son. "Why?" she whispered. "Why would Christian do this, after all your father did for him?" Pascal said nothing. He stared at her, his face unreadable, lips pressed into a tight line. The question hung in the air like smoke, choking and bitter. For a moment his eyes flickered with something. Was it guilt or something darker? But he turned away without a word. Silently, he walked toward the staircase. "Pascal!" Margaret called softly, but he didn't stop or respond. He disappeared up the stairs, leaving her alone in the heavy silence. Once he was gone, the silence grew louder. Margaret leaned back into the couch, her hand trembling slightly as she placed the half-empty glass on the table. Her eyes trailed to the door where the police had taken Christian, where her world had unraveled. Her chest rose and fell heavily as memories flooded her mind. Christian's laughter as a child, the way he used to run into her arms, believing she was his mother, the way Alfred had looked at him, with pride, with love. Her hand moved to her chest, pressing over her heart. Could he really have done this? No. Deep down, she knew. Christian wasn't capable of murder. Not the boy she had raised, not the one who still called her mum even when she turned her back on him. But Pascal? She squeezed her eyes shut. He had been changing. No, she had changed him. Molded him. Pushed him. Told him the world owed him something, that Christian was the obstacle in his path. And now Alfred was gone. Her heart ached at the thought. Her husband, her companion for decades, now dead, with their home wrapped in grief and lies. Her mind flashed to his last warning, the one he gave her that night in her room. The thing about fire, Margaret, is that when it starts burning and it doesn't care who started it, it burns whatever it touches. A shiver crawled up her spine. She had lit the match, but now the flames were licking at her heels. The fire was here, and it had taken Alfred. And what will it take next? Tears gathered in her eyes, but she quickly wiped them away. She had made her choices, but guilt was a cruel companion, one that didn't leave easily. Margaret sat alone in the dim room, the echo of Alfred's voice haunting the silence. The fire had started, and now there was no turning back. The next morning, news of Chief Alfred's death had begun to circulate more broadly, creating a thick atmosphere of shock and uncertainty at the office. Employees whispered in small groups, struggling to grasp the reality of what had happened. Despite the tragedy, Pascal had wasted no time. By noon, he called an emergency staff meeting. Dressed in a crisp black suit with a sober expression, he stood at the front of the boardroom. "My family is going through a difficult time," he began, his voice calm but steady. "I ask for your patience and support. I'll be taking over the company's operations in the meantime, until the dust settles." There were no objections, just nods of understanding. No one dared challenge him, not with the death of the chairman and Christian's arrest. Helen sat quietly, her eyes on Pascal the entire time. He didn't stutter. He didn't flinch. He carried himself like a man who had prepared for this day. And that disturbed her more than anything. Later that evening, with a head full of thoughts and a heart weighed down by suspicion, Helen made her way to the police station. She signed her name at the entrance and was escorted to the visitors' area. Her heart pounded when she saw Christian walk in, dressed in a simple shirt and trousers, his eyes tired but lighting up faintly when he saw her. "Christian," she said, struggling to hold back her tears. He sat across from her, separated only by a short wooden table. A police officer stood nearby, watching but not interrupting. "I'm so sorry," she whispered. Christian nodded slowly, his voice hoarse. "I don't even know how this happened, Helen. One moment I was talking to Dad, and the next thing, I was waking up to see the police in my room. They dragged me downstairs. They said I killed him." Helen leaned in. "What do you mean? What happened that night?" Christian lowered his gaze. "We had dinner. Dad talked to me in the study, just father-son talk. He didn't seem worried or angry. Then I felt dizzy, like something wasn't right. I went to bed. I didn't hear anything until the police burst into my room. They said they found the knife, the murder weapon, under my bed." Helen swallowed. That sounds planned. Christian, are you sure you didn't drink or eat something strange? He looked up slowly. No, nothing at all. I had a few drinks during dinner. Nothing unusual. Helen's voice dropped to a whisper. What if you were drugged and someone used that opportunity to plant that knife? Christian shook his head. But who would do that? Why? Helen hesitated. I think it's Pascal. Christian frowned. Pascal? No, Helen. He's my brother. He might be a bit proud, but he'd never do something like this. Helen's eyes didn't leave his. I didn't want to believe it either, but the documents you gave me, the embezzlement records, he's been stealing from the company. Maybe he knew your father found out, and now your father is dead. Christian blinked, clearly shaken. I know all these are speculation, Christian, but I'm telling you now because I want you to understand. Someone's setting you up. Someone with a motive. Someone who knows how to play this game well. Christian leaned back slowly, his chest rising and falling. I don't know what to think. Helen reached out and gently held his hand. Then trust me to think for you. Just for now. I won't rest until the truth comes out. Christian stared at her, eyes heavy with emotion. For the first time since his arrest, there was a flicker of hope in them. I appreciate you, Helen. Helen clenched her jaw. Pascal's fingerprints are all over this. Maybe not literally, but everything points to him. And now he's comfortably sitting in your father's chair, running the company. Christian glanced over his shoulder at the officer nearby, then lowered his voice. There's someone we need to contact, he said. Helen leaned closer, eyes alert. Before all this happened, Christian began, Dad told me something strange, something I didn't understand then. He reminded me of a book I used to love as a child. Said I would find answers there when the time comes. But more importantly, he gave me a phone number. Told me that if anything ever happened, I should reach out to the company's independent auditor. An auditor? Christian nodded. His name is Mr. Desmond. He's not on the regular company payroll. Dad said he trusted him. Said he would know what to do if something went wrong. Christian took a deep breath and slowly recited the number, his voice firm but quiet. Helen quickly typed it into her phone. Reach out to him, Christian urged. Explain what's going on. Tell him that I have been locked up. Helen looked at him for a moment, a flicker of hope returning to her eyes. I'll find him, and I'll tell him everything. Christian gave a weak smile. Thank you, Helen. You're the only one who stood by me. I won't stop until we clear your name, she said, standing up. As she walked toward the station's exit, determination in her stride, Christian sat back with a sigh. He didn't know what Desmond would do or if it would even be enough, but it was a start, a sliver of hope in the darkness. And right now, that was everything. Anita sat curled up on the edge of her bed, the lights in her room turned low, her phone clutched tightly in her palm. Her chest rose and fell rapidly as panic gripped her. The silence in her apartment was too loud, filled with the echoes of everything going wrong. Her fingers trembled as she opened her call log and stared at the last call. Pascal. She hadn't picked up his recent calls. She didn't know what to say to him anymore. This wasn't the plan. She had agreed to help Pascal, yes, but it was only supposed to be about the files, the documents that held damning evidence of his fraudulent activities within the company, files that, if discovered, could send him to jail. He had come to her desperate, telling her it was only a matter of time before Alfred found out. That once Christian got his hands on those files, everything would come crashing down. And Anita, she had helped him. Because she loved him. She had tampered with the CCTV cameras near Alfred's study and along the hallway that led to the bedrooms. Just a little edit, just enough to give Pascal easy access without raising suspicion. She had made sure no one would see him enter. No one would trace anything back to him. It was supposed to be quiet, quick, clean. But now, Alfred was dead. She rose from the bed suddenly, her breath shallow as she began pacing the room, Her mind felt like a storm, each step echoing with guilt. She hadn't signed up for this. She had never imagined that Pascal would go so far. Destroying the files was one thing, murder was another. "What have I done?" she whispered, her voice shaking. She covered her mouth with her hand, a low gasp escaping her lips as her knees buckled slightly. She sat back on the bed and pressed her palms to her face. "This wasn't supposed to happen," she whispered. The more she thought about it, the more she realized how deeply entangled she had become in something far beyond her control. When Helen mentioned the documents in passing, she had immediately called Pascal. She thought she was doing the smart thing, warning him, protecting him. But now she felt like a pawn in a game that had spun out of control. Her phone buzzed again. Pascal calling. She stared at it without answering, her heart pounding. She couldn't talk to him. Not yet. Not until she figured out what her next move was. Did the police know? Was Helen already suspecting her? What if Christian remembered something? What if they found out about her involvement? "I need to get out of this," she murmured, tears now gathering in her eyes. "I need to disappear." But how? How do you walk away from someone like Pascal? Someone who knew too much? Someone capable of this? Anita slowly reached for the drawer beside her bed and pulled out the envelope Pascal had given her the night of the incident. It contained money, a lot of it. "For your loyalty," he had said. She stared at it like it was poison. Guilt gnawed at her chest, squeezing tightly. She stood up again and walked to the window, peeking out as though expecting someone to be watching her. Her breaths grew shallow. The walls were closing in. This wasn't the plan, and now she was trapped in a nightmare she couldn't wake up from. Margaret sat on the edge of her bed, her eyes hollow, her mind drifting between the past and the painful present. The room was dim, yet her heart felt darker. Since the night Alfred was murdered, she had barely closed her eyes. Sleep would not come, only regrets and echoes of Alfred's calm voice whispering, "When the fire starts burning, it doesn't care who lit the match." She had lit it. In her desperate bid to secure what she believed was Pascal's birthright, she had thrown her family into chaos. She had whispered poison into Pascal's ears, watched as Christian was pushed aside, and stood silent when the truth needed a voice. Now Alfred was gone. Christian was behind bars, and the son she had protected, Pascal, was becoming a stranger even to her. Margaret rose to her feet, walked to the wardrobe, and pulled out a simple gown. Her hands trembled slightly as she buttoned it up. Today, she needed answers her heart wouldn't give. She needed to see Christian, not as a boy she resented, not as a rival to her son, but as the son who had called her mother, even when she treated him like an outsider. At the police station, she sat in the visitors' area, her eyes fixed on the door. When Christian walked in wearing his prison uniform and escorted by a guard, her heart clenched. He sat opposite her, calm but weary. She cleared her throat and spoke first, voice sharp but uncertain. "Why, Christian? Why would you kill Alfred after everything he did for you?" Christian stared at her for a moment. No anger, just sadness. "Mother," he said softly. The word made her flinch. "You know I didn't kill him. I never raised my voice at him, never raised my hand. All I ever wanted was for us to be a family. You, Alfred, Pascal, me. That's all." Margaret's lips trembled. "Have I ever hurt you?" he asked. "Have I ever done anything wrong to deserve the way you treated me? Even when you were cold, I still saw you as my mother. I still loved you." He leaned forward slightly, his voice full of pain. "I never cared about who would run the company. I would have been happy seeing Pascal lead it if only we were happy together. But someone tore us apart." Margaret looked away quickly, blinking fast to stop the tears that threatened. "I didn't kill him," Christian said again, his voice breaking. "I loved him. And I love you too." She stood abruptly, not trusting herself to say a word. She turned and walked out quickly, her heels clicking sharply across the tiled floor. Inside her car, she gripped the steering wheel tightly. Her chest rose and fell with heavy breaths, and then finally the tears came. Not quiet sobs, but gut-wrenching cries. Years of guilt, of pride, of bitterness pouring out at once. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry," she whispered. "Christian, please forgive me." She stayed in the car for several minutes, the windows fogging from her breath and tears. Then, with shaking hands, she wiped her face, started the engine, and drove home. The fire she helped light was burning out of control, and now she wasn't sure if there was anything left to save. Helen sat on her bed, clutching her phone as she stared at the number Christian had given her the day before. Desmond. A name she didn't know, but Christian had spoken it with such confidence. She had no doubt the man could be trusted. Christian had only told her one thing: "Call him. Tell him I've been arrested. That's all he needs to hear." She took a deep breath and dialed. The line rang twice before a firm, low voice answered. "Hello?" "Good evening," Helen began quickly. "My name is Helen. I work with Christian. He's currently in police custody, accused of Chief Alfred's murder." There was a short pause. "Where is he being held?" Helen hesitated. "Mainland Police Division." "I'll meet you both there by noon tomorrow," Desmond said. "All right. Thank you," Helen replied, but the line had already gone dead. She stared at her screen, confused by how quickly the call ended. What surprised her most was his calmness, almost like he already knew everything. The next day, the sun glared over the city, indifferent to the weight of the secrets hanging in the air. Inside the visitors' area of the police station, Christian sat beside Helen. His face was tired, but there was hope in his eyes for the first time in days. When Desmond walked in, they stood to greet him before sitting again. Desmond wasted no time. "Copies of the documents your father gave you," he said, looking at Christian, "contained enough evidence to expose Pascal's embezzlement and money laundering schemes. The board has been notified, and a quiet investigation is underway." Christian's brows lifted slightly. Helen leaned forward, her eyes fixed on Desmond. "He'll be arrested soon," Desmond continued, "but so far there's nothing linking him directly to Chief Alfred's death." Christian's face dropped slightly. "So he gets away with it?" Desmond shook his head. "Not necessarily. Once he's behind bars for financial crimes, it opens the door for a more thorough investigation. With the company no longer under his grip, more people will be willing to talk. If evidence surfaces linking him to Alfred's murder, it'll be enough to keep him in prison for the rest of his life." Helen nodded slowly. "It's a start." Meanwhile, in a high-rise apartment across town, Pascal sat alone in a dimly lit room, sipping from a glass of wine he hadn't touched. His suit jacket was slung carelessly over the chair, and his tie hung loose around his neck. The call came through. "It's done," the voice said coldly. "She won't be talking to anyone again." Pascal closed his eyes and exhaled deeply. The maid, the one who drugged Christian's wine, was no longer a threat. Another loose end tied up. He placed the phone down slowly, staring at it with a grim expression. One more problem remained: Anita. She hadn't picked his calls in days, and that was dangerous. She knew too much about the files, the cameras, the night of the murder. She was supposed to be part of the plan, not a ticking time bomb. "Why won't you just listen?" he muttered under his breath. He leaned back in his chair, fingers steepled beneath his chin, calculating. If Anita wouldn't cooperate, he might need to make another hard decision, because everything was spiraling, and he was determined not to let anyone ruin his plans. Anita hadn't slept properly in days. Ever since Chief Alfred's death, she felt like a shadow was following her. Something invisible but heavy. She hadn't been to work, hadn't stepped near the office, The thought of running into Pascal made her skin crawl. She hasn't picked his calls since the night he said, "It's done." But not knowing what he was up to terrified her even more. She had been hopping from hotel to hotel, never staying in one place for more than a night. But even that wasn't enough. Something about the quiet halls and strange faces made her feel watched, like someone was always just a step behind her. Panic rising in her chest, she scrolled through her phone and called the one person she thought might listen, Helen. Helen didn't ask too many questions. She just agreed to meet her at the small, worn-out hotel where Anita had been hiding. She arrived quickly, knocking lightly before stepping in. Anita looked like a ghost of herself, dark circles under her eyes, hands trembling as she clutched a throw blanket close to her chest. "You look like you've seen a ghost," Helen said cautiously, sitting on the edge of the bed. "I feel like one," Anita murmured, her voice barely above a whisper. Helen watched her carefully. "Why did you ask to see me, Anita? What's going on?" "I didn't mean for this to happen," she whispered, looking down, fiddling with her fingers. "You remember when you told me something was off about the company accounts, and you asked me not to tell anyone?" Helen nodded slowly. I told Pascal," Anita said, her voice cracking. "I told him what you said. He asked me if there was a way to clean it up, to make it go away. I said no, that the system already flagged the transactions and that his father might be aware." Helen's brows furrowed. "And?" Anita swallowed hard. "Then he came up with a plan. He said he'd sneak in and take the document. He just needed me to alter the CCTV so it wouldn't show him going in and out. That's all he asked. I swear, Helen, that's all I agreed to." Helen leaned in, her voice cautious. "Wait, you didn't plan for what to happen, Anita?" Anita's eyes widened with guilt. "I didn't know he was going to kill his father. I thought it was just about the file, just about covering his tracks. I would have never helped if I knew it would end like this. Never." Helen stared at her, her expression tightening. "So you altered the CCTV to the study, knowing he was trying to cover up a crime, and you didn't think there could be consequences?" Anita shook her head frantically, tears brimming. "I loved him, Helen. I thought I was helping him avoid prison. I thought I was saving him." There was silence between them. Then Helen slowly reached into her bag and took out her phone. "Anita," she said firmly, "I need you to repeat everything you just said. I need to record it. If anything happens to you or if we need evidence, this will matter." Anita hesitated but nodded, her body trembling. She repeated the story, this time with Helen's phone recording. Once it ended, Helen tapped the screen and locked it. "I'm going to protect you, but you need to stay hidden and keep your phone on. No more disappearing." Anita nodded tearfully. "Thank you, Helen." But Helen's mind was already racing. If Pascal had gone this far, what else was he capable of? Margaret sat on the edge of her bed, her heart pounding heavily in her chest. The house was quieter than it had ever been. Too quiet, and the silence only made her thoughts louder. She had tossed and turned all night, unable to close her eyes without seeing Alfred's lifeless body. Her husband. The man who had loved her fiercely, despite all the storms they had weathered. But what haunted her most was the conversation she had with Christian at the police station. His voice, broken but full of truth, lingered in her ears. Now, she needed answers, and she needed them from the one person she had trusted too much. Her son. "Pascal," she said as he stepped into her room. "Sit." Pascal walked in, his expression calm but guarded. He took a seat across from her, one leg crossed over the other, his fingers tapping against the armrest like a ticking clock. "I need to ask you something," Margaret began, her voice quiet but firm. "And I want the truth." She looked directly into his eyes. "Did you kill your father?" There was a long pause. Then Pascal scoffed lightly and leaned forward, his voice cold. "Everything I did for both of us." Margaret's eyes widened slightly, her breath catching. If I hadn't done it, Pascal continued, there was no way I would have taken over the company, not after he gave everything to Christian. He told me to my face that Christian was the one. You heard it too. I couldn't let that happen. That's what you wanted, remember? So don't act like you didn't know it would come to this. Margaret stared at him like she was looking at a stranger. Her lips trembled. Pascal, I didn't ask you to kill your father. I loved your father so deeply. I could never even imagine hurting him. Pascal's eyes narrowed. Now you want to walk away? Pretend your hands are clean? His voice rose with fury. I did the hard part. I made the sacrifice, and now you sit there acting like you're better than me. You don't get to abandon me now, Mother. This is your doing as much as it is mine. Margaret's voice fell to a whisper, pained and trembling. I don't recognize you anymore. She looked away, blinking rapidly to hold back tears. Then, gathering strength, she turned back to him and asked, Do you have anything to do with the missing maid? Pascal paused, his jaw tensed. She was a loose end, he said coldly. She needed to go. Margaret gasped, her body sinking slowly back onto the sofa. Her heart cracked into pieces, the weight of his words too much to bear. Her hand clutched her chest as she shook her head in disbelief. I want you to leave, Pascal, she said quietly without looking at him. Leave this house now. He stood slowly, staring at her with something like disgust. But as he turned toward the entrance door and opened it, 2 uniformed policemen were already waiting. Mr. Pascal, one of them said, you're under arrest for embezzlement and money laundering. You have the right to remain silent. Pascal's eyes widened in shock as they stepped forward, cuffing his wrists. Margaret stood frozen, watching everything. The sun she thought she was helping rise had burned everything down instead, and now he was being taken away. The news of Pascal's arrest swept through the office like wildfire. Staff huddled in small groups, whispering in corners, their voices hushed and uncertain. No one knew what to believe. Some said he had been laundering money for years. Others claimed he had something to do with Chief Alfred's death. It all seemed too scandalous, too unreal, but the flashing lights of police cars from the previous day, the murmurs from the boardroom, and the missing maid all pointed to a storm that had finally come home. Helen sat at her desk, unable to concentrate. The files in front of her blurred with each blink. Finally, she grabbed her handbag and headed out. At the police station, she met Christian in the visitors' area. His eyes were tired, his shirt wrinkled from long hours behind bars, but there was a calmness in his gaze. They've arrested Pascal, she said softly, leaning forward so no one could overhear. Everyone is talking. Christian didn't look surprised. It was bound to happen, but this is just one part of the puzzle. He looked directly into her eyes. I need you to go to the house, to the study. There's a book, The Boy Who Sang to Birds. Check the shelves, open it. See what you find. Helen nodded, already rising to her feet. The house felt different now, quiet, heavy, like it had taken in a deep breath and never let it out. Helen stepped inside and found Margaret sitting alone in the living room. The once dignified woman looked like a shadow of herself, her hair messy, eyes glassy, an empty bottle of wine on the table beside her, and another half drained in her hand. She looked up at Helen, saying nothing, no greeting, no glare, just silence. Helen walked over, hesitating. Ma, please, I need to check something in the study. Margaret waved her hand weakly, a motion of dismissal. Go. Helen walked past her, heart racing. In the study, she scanned the shelves until her eyes caught the familiar title. The Boy Who Sang to Birds. She pulled it out gently, her fingers trembling. The book felt heavier than it should. She opened it and gasped. Inside was a slim black recorder, still active with a blinking light. Tucked behind it was a sealed envelope, Alfred's handwriting scrawled across the front. Her fingers brushed over the name written on it, Christian. Without a second thought, She slid both items into her handbag and closed the book. She placed it back on the shelf exactly how she found it. As she stepped out of the study, she paused again by Margaret. "I'll be leaving now," Helen said gently. But Margaret didn't respond. Her eyes were lost in the flames of the empty fireplace, her thoughts somewhere far from that room. Helen stepped out of the house, her heart pounding. In her bag might be the answers to everything, or the beginning of a much darker truth. Helen sat at the corner of her bed, the sealed envelope and the recorder lying quietly beside her like sacred relics. Her mind raced. She picked up her phone and dialed Desmond. "Hello?" His voice came through, calm as always. "It's Helen," she began. "I found something. The recorder. And a letter from Chief Alfred. You need to hear this." Desmond's voice sharpened. "Where are you?" "Home. I can meet you at the station with Christian." "I'll be there," he said, without hesitation. The air at the police station was thick with tension. Desmond arrived shortly after Helen, carrying a notepad. They were led to the visitors' area where Christian was already waiting, his face drawn but alert. Helen took out the recorder and placed it on the table. "You found it?" Christian asked, eyes wide. She nodded. "I haven't played it yet. I wanted us to listen together." Desmond gave a short nod of approval. Helen pressed play. The static crackled for a second. Then Chief Alfred's voice came through, clear and strong. "I gave you a chance, Pascal. You were my son. You could have done the right thing." Pascal's voice followed, laced with bitterness. "You gave everything to Christian. Even the company. I had to do something. You disappointed me. I raised you better." A scuffle, a grunt, then silence, and the sound of a knife dropping. Helen stopped the tape. Her hands trembled. No one spoke for a long moment. Christian slowly reached for the envelope and tore it open. Inside was a handwritten letter from Alfred. His eyes scanned it quickly, but then he slowed, reading each word aloud. "My dear son, Christian, if you're reading this, then I'm no longer with you. I'm sorry I never had the courage to tell you to your face that you are adopted. I wanted to protect you, always. You deserved love, not confusion or rejection. Forgive me for my silence." Christian dropped the letter, his lips parted, the pain dawning fully. Tears spilled down his cheeks. "That's why she hated me," he whispered. "She always knew." Helen looked at him, eyes glistening, her heart breaking. Desmond gently placed a hand on Christian's shoulder. "This is enough," Desmond said. "This is what we needed. Between the recording and the letter, we can put Pascal away for life. I'll speak to the lawyers. We'll file for court proceedings immediately." Christian looked up, his voice barely a whisper. "What happens now?" "With this new evidence," Desmond said, "you'll be granted bail. You can go home, for now. But we're not done yet." Christian gave a small nod. He didn't feel free. Not yet. But for the first time he could breathe. The air outside the police station felt different, lighter, but not free. Helen helped Christian into the car, watching him quietly as he settled into the passenger seat. There was a heaviness in his eyes, a storm of hurt, clarity, and silent questions. "I want to see her," he said softly. Helen didn't ask who. She simply nodded and turned the car toward the mansion. The Alfreds' mansion stood like a hollow monument of all that had been lost. The once pristine compound now felt haunted. The curtains were drawn, and the doors hung slightly ajar. Helen opened the door slowly. Christian stepped in behind her. Margaret sat slumped on the couch in the sitting room, half awake, her silk robe wrinkled. The glass on the table was half full, while empty bottles surrounded her like fallen soldiers. Her head lifted slowly as they entered, her eyes struggling to focus. "Christian," she said, almost in disbelief. Christian stood still, hands in his pockets, his expression unreadable. "I just came to see you," he began, his voice calm but cold. "I came to look you in the face and ask you something." Margaret straightened slightly, blinking hard as if trying to shake off the alcohol cloud. Was it worth it? She stared at him. Was the fight, the division, the hatred, was it all worth it? His voice broke slightly. Did being adopted make me less of a son to you? Margaret's lips trembled, but she said nothing. I didn't want the company. I never fought you. I just wanted peace, a family. Still, silence. Did you get everything you wanted? Christian asked. Margaret finally looked up, eyes red. I'm sorry, she whispered. Christian let out a breath, long and heavy. Behind him, Helen stood by the dining table, her arms crossed, her eyes locked on Margaret with restrained emotion. Christian looked at Margaret one last time. I hope it was worth it. He turned away, nodding slightly to Helen. Without another word, they walked out of the mansion, leaving Margaret with the echo of her regrets. She didn't call them back. She couldn't. The courtroom was filled to the brim, reporters, family members, curious spectators. Whispers echoed as the judge took his seat and the session began. At the front sat Christian, flanked by Desmond and Helen. His face was calm but firm, his heart prepared for whatever the gavel would declare. Margaret entered quietly, dressed in black. Her eyes were hollow, her lips trembling. She hadn't spoken to anyone all morning. She simply sat a few rows behind Christian, her hands shaking in her lap. Pascal was brought in, hands cuffed, jaw clenched. He looked around the courtroom with bitter disdain, locking eyes with Christian and then with his mother. She couldn't even meet his gaze. The judge cleared his throat and began to read. After careful consideration of the overwhelming evidence provided by the prosecution, this court finds the defendant, Pascal Evans, guilty of the charges of embezzlement, money laundering, and the premeditated murder of Chief Alfred Evans. For these crimes, this court hereby sentences the defendant to life imprisonment with hard labour. Gasps filled the courtroom. Pascal's mouth twitched, but he didn't utter a word. The officers approached to lead him out. As they gripped his arms, something in him snapped. With a swift motion, he shoved one of the officers hard, grabbing the officer's gun from its holster. "No!" someone shouted. Time slowed. The courtroom exploded in panic as Pascal raised the gun. His eyes were wild, locked on one person, Margaret. A shot rang out. Margaret jerked backward, a red bloom spreading on her chest. Screams filled the courtroom. Christian rushed toward her as officers tackled Pascal to the ground. Blood poured from Margaret's chest as she collapsed into Christian's arms, her lips moving faintly. "I'm sorry." "Stay with me, somebody help," Christian yelled, cradling her as sirens blared in the distance. Pascal was dragged away, shouting, "She made me this way! She turned me into this!" But no one listened. The courtroom was now a scene of chaos, grief, and shattered lives. And Christian knelt in the middle of it all, holding the mother who had never truly held him. The cold fluorescent lights of the hospital hallway buzzed faintly above Christian's head. His hands were covered in his mother's blood, trembling as he sat motionless on the plastic chair outside the emergency room. Helen sat beside him, her arms wrapped around his shoulders, her face drenched with silent tears. Moments earlier, he had ridden with Margaret in the ambulance, holding her hand tightly as the paramedics worked frantically. Her eyes had fluttered open once, lips quivering as if trying to speak, but no sound came out. Then they closed and never opened again. A doctor stepped into the hallway, removing his gloves slowly. "I'm sorry," he said gently. She was pronounced dead on arrival. The bullet pierced her heart. There was nothing we could do. The words echoed in Christian's mind like thunder. He bent forward, burying his face in his palms as the weight of it all crashed over him. Helen gripped him tighter. "She died in my arms," he whispered hoarsely. "No matter what she did, she didn't deserve to die like that." "I know," Helen said, holding back her own tears. "She was still your mother." Christian sobbed openly now, the kind of crying that came from a place so deep that it tore through the soul. Everything had happened so fast. His father's murder, his arrest, the betrayal, and now this. He felt like a boy again, alone in a world that had never really accepted him. "She never even told me she loved me," he choked. Helen pulled him close and kissed his head gently. "She didn't know how to love the right way, but I believe a part of her tried, even if she failed." Christian nodded slowly, tears still flowing. All the pain, all the hurt, none of it could be undone. But in that moment, with Helen beside him, he allowed himself to grieve, not just for Margaret, but for the family that was now gone. The sky was grey, a soft drizzle falling as 2 caskets were lowered into the earth, one beside the other. Alfred and Margaret, once bound by love and later by tragedy, now rested side by side in silence. A small gathering of friends, former colleagues and staff stood quietly under umbrellas. The air was heavy, not just with rain but with unspoken sorrow. Christian stood still, his eyes hidden behind dark shades, but the weariness on his face said it all. Beside him was Helen, dressed in simple black, her hand never leaving his arm. Anita stood a short distance away, her eyes fixed on the grave, her expression solemn. As the service ended and people began to disperse, Helen walked over to Anita, her heels crunching on the wet gravel. "You're free now," Helen said softly. Anita turned to her, startled for a moment. "No one knows what you did," Helen continued, her voice calm but kind. "You can return to work. Start over." Anita blinked back tears, shaking her head. "Not after everything that happened. I can't walk into that company and see Christian's face every day, knowing what I was a part of, even if unintentionally." Helen looked at her long and hard, then gave a gentle nod. "I understand. I'll apply somewhere else," Anita said, wiping her eyes. "Start fresh, and maybe do things differently this time." Helen opened her arms, and the 2 women embraced tightly under the cold sky. "Promise me we'll stay in touch?" Anita asked. "Always," Helen whispered. Later that evening, Helen drove Christian home. The house felt empty now, filled only with memories and silence. She helped him out of the car, walked him to the door, and stayed close. "Are you okay?" she asked gently. Christian looked at her with tired eyes. "No, but I will be." She nodded and entered the house with him, determined to help him find light again, even after all the darkness. 1 month had passed since the burial, since the courts closed the chapter on Pascal's crimes, and since the chaos that tore Christian's world apart. Now the glass doors of Alfred Holdings slid open, and Christian walked in, not as the accused, not as the forgotten son, but as the man ready to take back everything he was once denied. The reception area buzzed with quiet excitement as staff stood to greet him. "Welcome back, sir," one of the secretaries said with a smile. "Good to have you back, Mr. Christian," another added, nodding respectfully. Christian offered a small smile, humbled by their warmth. He walked through the hallway that once felt so cold, and now strangely felt like home. This was his father's legacy, and now it was his. Upstairs in the executive office, Helen waited by his door. She smiled when she saw him. "Your office missed you," she teased. Christian chuckled softly. "And you?" Helen grinned. "A little." They walked inside together, taking in the familiar space. Christian sat on the leather chair, running his fingers across the desk. So much had happened. Yet here he was, still standing. "I've made a decision," he said quietly after a pause. Helen turned to him. "About what?" "The family house," he replied. "I'm going to sell it." Helen blinked. "You sure?" Christian nodded slowly. "That house, it holds too much pain. Too many memories I don't want to carry anymore. It's time I stop holding on to the past. I want to start rebuilding. From scratch. My way." Helen walked over and took his hand. "You're brave, Christian. I'm just tired of being stuck in a place where love was measured by blood, he said. It's time to build something better, something real. Helen squeezed his hand gently. You're not alone. He looked up at her, a flicker of hope in his eyes. Thank you, Helen, for everything. She smiled warmly. Always. 6 months later. The city sky was awash with golden light as the sun rose gently above the horizon. From the tall windows of Christian's new apartment, the world looked peaceful. A gentle breeze danced through the open curtain, and somewhere in the distance, birds were singing. Christian stood by the window, dressed in a simple shirt, holding a cup of tea. Life had changed. The company was running better than ever. With Desmond's help, they had recovered missing funds and restructured the financial systems. The board stood firmly behind Christian now, respecting his quiet strength and integrity. He had earned not just a title, but trust. He turned when he heard light footsteps behind him. Helen walked into the room, her hair still damp from the shower, wearing one of his oversized shirts. She smiled at him and walked over to wrap her arms around his waist. Didn't realize you were up already, she murmured. Too much on my mind, he said, placing a kiss on her forehead. Thinking about them? She asked gently. He nodded. Alfred, Margaret, even Pascal. There was a long pause before he spoke again. I lost a lot, but I gained clarity. I see now that love isn't always perfect. It's flawed, messy, sometimes painful. But that doesn't mean we stop choosing it. Helen looked up at him. You still have a good heart, Christian. I think I'm learning how to live again, he said, setting the cup down. Helen reached into a small drawer and brought out an envelope. I've been holding on to this. It was left at the office for you. Christian opened it carefully. Inside was a letter from Anita. She had started a tech company in Abuja. She wrote to thank him for forgiving her and for Helen's kindness. She said working on something of her own now gave her a new sense of purpose. Christian smiled. She found her way. Just like you did, Helen said. They stood in silence for a while, holding each other, watching as the sunlight filled the room. He had lost a father, a mother, a brother. But in the ashes of betrayal and pain, he found strength, clarity, and love. The boy who was once forgotten had become a man who would never be overlooked again. As they stepped out onto the balcony to face the rising sun, Christian whispered, more to himself than anyone else, I'm finally free.
If you enjoyed this story, please like, share with your friends and family, comment and subscribe to our channel for more amazing stories.